Next up, we're going to start adding some leafy trees. We did the evergreens, now let's do some deciduous trees. We're going to start with some green ones, and we get to do what we always get to do, my favorite part, if you haven't figured out, which is make a new brush. This time, we're going to start from scratch. We're going to start from the basic circle. Let's go to the presets, and if you got a filter here, you can clear it. Let's type basic. We've got the basic circle, there it is. I'm going to go to the brush engine. Basic circle is a simple pixel brush. It has a round brush tip with some soft edges, kind of. You can see that here. It has a size dynamic, so the size changes with pressure, so it should get a little bit bigger with more pressure. You can see that there. Let's go back to the brush tip. I don't want a generated brush, I'm going to use a texture. So let's go to predefined, and I want you to find something called Sparkle 1. Ooh, there it is, that was a lucky tap. A2 Sparkle 1, 64 by 64. And it looks something like that. Again, let's zoom in. I'm just going to click out here and zoom in a bit so we get a better idea of what the shape actually is. That's interesting. So we've got an interesting splotch there. You can imagine how these might start looking like leaves or branches. What we're also going to do is, instead of having this streak like this, we only want it to appear every once in a while in our stroke, and we can do that by changing the spacing. So right now it is drawing this little texture every 0.05 pixels maybe? I'm not sure how it does that calculation, but you can see the obvious difference here. If I crank it up, I'm going to get one every 3.41 times that. And as we go down, we can get the brush appearing more and more often until it appears like a solid brush. So another thing we can do is we can just turn on auto. And what auto will do is it will change the distance between each drawing of the texture based on the size of your brush. So if you increase the brush size, it will proportionally adjust the spacing between the individual textures. But we don't want something that looks like that. Let's increase the size to 100 pixels. But we don't want it to look the same all the time. We kind of want to take this texture and we want it to have a random rotation so it appears all jiggly and jaggly, kind of like our cloud brush does. Actually, it's exactly like our cloud brush does. So let's go to the rotation here. I'm going to clear this. And I don't want it to rotate based on pressure. I want it to rotate randomly. And we can do that with this section here called fuzzy. I'm going to turn off pressure. I'm going to leave on fuzzy. And it's not going to do anything yet because I haven't actually turned it on. I'm adjusting some settings. I'm going to turn on rotation. And now, every time it draws one of these things, it's going to be at a random rotation. There we go. That looks much better. You can see it's got some dynamics here where it's getting darker and larger with pressure. So here it's light pressure, and here it's more pressure. So it's changing the size, which is probably what's happening here. Yep, changing size with pressure. And it's also changing the opacity. So if I go to opacity, you can see, yes, low pressure, low opacity. It's invisible at the lightest pressure, and then it becomes fully opaque at the highest pressure. So let's test this out. I'm going to go choose sap green, or actually, I'm going to choose one of these darker green colors that we've been using, and just imagine that you're adding some deciduous trees, some deciduous stuff. I think that's going to work okay. One thing I do want to change is I want to be able to get a smaller brush at the tip. If I kind of do a stroke like this, that I get some little points if I want to. And we can do that by going to the size option here, and at low pressure I want our brush to be really small, and right now it has a limit. At the lowest pressure it's going to be 50% of the full size. At full pressure it's going to be our 1 inch, 100 pixels, and at the lowest pressure it's going to be half of that, and you can kind of tell that there. Zero pressure, full pressure. I'm going to grab this red circle handle here, and I'm going to pull it down in the bottom left corner. So now at the lowest pressure it's tiny, and it will build up to its full 1 inch as I apply more pressure. And you can see that there. At the lowest pressure, it's going to be 0% of its size. It's going to be small. And as I increase the pressure, low pressure to high pressure, it's going to increase the size until it gets up to its full 1 inch at full pressure. So it gets lighter and it gets larger. So what this is going to allow us to do is, as we lift off the pen with a lighter stroke, it's going to come to a round little tip, kind of like that, which is cool. I like that. It's a minor adjustment to the brush, but you can tweak these settings forever and you can get exactly what you want. It's a lot of fun playing around with them. As I've said, it doesn't actually get as pointy as I want it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click in the middle and I'm just going to pull this down, which is going to cause the brush to stay smaller longer until I get to really high pressures. And let's see what happens there. Now you can see I'm getting that point, right? So this is the actual, I'm kind of mimicking the stroke that I'm doing where I'm just full pressure and then off. And that's kind of what I want, like that. So if I wanted to, I can lighten up slowly and I'll get those light little points. And if you don't like that, if you find that annoying when you're drawing, you can just drag that off. I'm going to leave it about there. Whoop. Before we close this, let's save this brush. We're going to call this Deciduous. Actually, we're going to call this BR Leafy. Can we pull this up? This does not at all represent the brush we have now, so let's just get rid of that and draw some of that stuff. So we'll have an idea of what this actually is. We can save that. Save to presets, BR Leafy. We'll go to our brushes, let's find it. We can search for BR, filter BR, and there's BR Leafy. Let's right click that one. I select it, right click, and I'm going to add it to my Bob Ross tag, and I should have it. There's my leafy brush. You can tell that right there. Alright, let's try it out. I'm actually going to increase the size to, can we try 200? Yeah, I want to start out with the size being about 200. And I'm going to zoom out a bit. We're adding some massive big sections here. Let's create a new layer. We'll call these Green Leafy, because we're going to have some other trees as well. Or we can call it Leafy 1 or something. I want this section to be about the same color as that tree here. So in my previously used colors, I'm just going to pick one of these dark green colors. Yeah, that looks good. I can hit delete, remember, to clear my layer, and we'll get started. Alright, time for some big decisions. We're going to fill a section out. We're going to frame this whole area all around here with some nice big leafy greens. And I've got about 200, I got 230, that's great. And I'm just going to start drawing out like this. This color isn't quite as dark as I wanted. That's okay. Let's darken it up. I'm just going to choose the darker one. Is that black? No, that's the dark green. Yeah, let's... There's actually one other really cool improvement we can add to this brush, which we'll do later when we use a very similar, the same brush to create more leafy greens, more leafy bushes and trees that are not green. Although it would work just as well for this. I'm just going to introduce this for now. Now we can add some twigs in here by using our palette knife, one of our palette knives. Let's use our textured snow knife, and we're just going to do some temporary adjustments. Let's change the rotation. We're actually going to change the rotation so that it always follows our pen. So when I go down, it's going to be vertical, and when I go left, it's going to be horizontal. And then that way, when we draw our streaks, they'll give us some neat twig effects. So this is just going to be temporary. I'm going to go to the rotation. I'm just going to add a dynamic where the rotation follows the drawing angle. I'm going to turn off tilt direction. So I've added rotation and I've added drawing angle, and the effect should be obvious now where it follows the drawing angle. However, it's not going straight. So let's go to the brush tip and we'll just set the angle to 0 what we want. Yep, 0 is what we want. So when I draw down, or when I draw left, that's the effect I want here. Okay, so this is just temporary. Remember, if you wanted to save this each time, you could just click that, and then when you restart Krita, you'd get it. I'm not going to save a new brush here. We're just using this for this one little effect. And I'm going to reduce the size to about 50 pixels because I don't want too big of streaks. I'm just going to do it right on my green leafy layer. Reduce the size to about 50 pixels. Let's zoom in a bit, come down here. And drawing green is not going to make twigs, but what we can do is we can hit the E key to go into erase mode, and we can erase little twigs. Now, that's not quite the same effect because we're actually erasing completely. So there's one other thing I want to do. And I'm going to reduce the opacity of this brush temporarily so it will only delete in erase mode 50% of the paint. We can do that by changing the opacity up here, or you can use the I key. The I key will decrease the opacity, and the neighboring O key will increase the opacity. Conveniently, very close to the left and right square bracket. So let's go down to about 50% opacity. Now this is not affecting the opacity of the layer, it's only going to affect the opacity of these brush strokes we're making right now. And now I'm just going to make a few twigs. There we go. That looks much more like what Bobby is doing with his own palette knife. It's just tiny little details that in the big picture just add a little bit of detail. Probably went a little bit overboard there, but what can I say? It's fun.